Shadow Attorney General Emily Thornberry standing by for us in Westminster. Good morning to you, Emily. Look, first of all, a thought on what we were just discussing there and Andrew Bridgen having the whip withdrawn. Do you think he should be allowed to stand again?
No, I personally think that the Tories should chuck him out of the party, but it's obviously a matter for them. They're not going to pay attention to my advice anyway.
OK, let's talk then about the anti-strike legislation that the government is proposing. Labour have been calling it all sorts of things, a sacking legislation that nurses would see themselves losing their jobs. But this works perfectly well across Europe.
How often is it actually used? Well, I think that's what's interesting. I think that there may be legislation across Europe, but it isn't actually used very much. Because the reality is that if you do use legislation like this, you are going to sack people who go on strike. Well, much better, surely, is to use the system that we already have, which is that people negotiate the basic safety levels, and you can see nurses running off picket lines in order to go and help when there is a particular crisis. That's the reality. That's what's always happened. And we know that even if they do pass this legislation, it's not going to help with the current situation. The current situation can only be helped if the government stops playing games, sits down and talks to the unions and negotiates a deal. They should have done it 6 months ago. The fact that we've left it until the very last minute, until attitudes have hardened, until people have actually gone on strike, until nurses have gone on strike for the very first time in their history, and now they want to negotiate, is obviously that much more difficult because, as I say, attitudes become harder.
You ask how often it's been used. Last year in France, Emily Thornberry, the French government intervened to stop a dispute at a refinery because it was having a major impact on the government. So it does get used. France is a civilised country, part of the European Union, so if they can use it, why can't the British government do the same?
Well, I think that the French system is not one that we have in this country. I think that their attitude to union relations is not the same as ours, and quite frankly, they've got a lot more strikes than we used to anyway. Have a lot more strikes than we have until the current impasse, where the government haven't been prepared to get involved in solving some of these disputes.
You say the Conservative Party should get around the negotiating table. Oh, we've lost you there. We return, I believe, to the Shadow Attorney General, Emily Thornberry. I hope you can still hear us. Sorry, we lost you for a nanosecond there. You were saying that instead of this sort of legislation, the government should sit around the negotiating table. Well, they did do that. They invited all of the union leaders in on Monday. Those negotiations are ongoing. I want to hear from Labour, because they've refused to say so far what they would agree to pay, because at the moment the government's trying to look after the public purse and find a reasonable and affordable approach, given that we're expecting inflation to halve by the end of the year.
So the first thing I would say is this. I'm pleased to hear that the government is now sitting down with the unions. As I say, they really shouldn't have left it until the middle of January, until the fact that people have been on strike and attitudes had hardened. Much better to have sat down when the problems were obviously developing in the summer, and to have started negotiations at that stage and not allowed it to get out of hand. During the whole time when we were in charge of the National Health Service, we didn't have strikes. Why didn't we have strikes? Because we sat down and talked to the unions and worked out the way to get through these matters. And of course, the strikes in the National Health Service aren't just about pay. They're also about working conditions, about the fact that we have a health service workforce that is exhausted and frankly tearful, and feel that no matter how hard they work, no matter how much they try, they just get by and they don't provide the sort of service that they want to be able to provide. So the problems are very deep-rooted and cannot be solved by one meeting with Rishi Sunak on Monday. However, what we would do is we would, as I say, not have allowed the situation to have got as bad as it has. And I don't know how much wiggle room the government has, because I don't have access to the books and to what the real scope for negotiations are. But we would have looked into it, and we wouldn't have said for months and months, we are not going to talk to you about pay. And even now, they seem to be saying, we're not going to talk to you about this year's pay, we're only going to talk to you about next year's pay. It seems to me to be a single-mindedness that is nothing more than unhelpful. And those that are suffering are the members of staff, but also the public who are affected by the strikes. And a competent and careful and appropriate government would never have allowed this to have happened.
Could I just ask you finally, Emily Thornberry, in the Commons yesterday, Labour MPs were criticising VAT, which private schools can claim through its charitable status. 1 in 7 Labour MPs went to private school. Why are you determined to take this benefit away when, in 13 years of the Labour government, neither Blair or Brown did any such thing?
I think that what we think is this, is that we should have excellent state schools that need to be properly funded. But at the moment we have, not only do we have underfunding in our state schools, but we have children who come to school who haven't had a breakfast and who come to school hungry and unable to learn. And on the other hand, we have private schools that we are all subsidising because they are not paying the sort of taxes that, frankly, they should be paying. And they're not paying full taxes because they're seen as charities. We would take away that status, and we would take away their access to being able to not pay VAT, and we would use that money for breakfast clubs for children who are not getting enough food.
But Emily Thornberry...
We need to be fair. That seems to me to be the sort of thing that any government should be doing, but certainly a Labour government will.
Sorry to interrupt you, but we are limited on time, and I just want to make the point, if you take away the charitable status, would you be happy then to see these private schools taking away the charity that they do, allowing their communities to use the resources, helping children that are on bursaries or scholarships or whatever that might be, so that people from all different backgrounds can benefit from that sort of education? And would you be happy to see school fees going up 7%, which means that a huge number of families who are just about managing being forced into the state sector at huge expense to the taxpayer? I mean, the Education Secretary yesterday saying that your plans were economically illiterate.
The school fees that are charged in the UK have huge variety, from relatively small amounts to more than the average wage is being paid for school fees. It'll be up to the schools to work out how they deal with having to pay VAT. But my priority is state schools and making sure that kids going to state schools are able to have something to eat. And I'm afraid that if you put it like that, I know which side I'm on.
Really good to get your thoughts this morning. Shadow Attorney General Emily Thornberry, thanks for your time this morning.